The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee, but to Elise Carver, it carried the weight of a tomb. The air conditioning hummed too loudly, a mechanical drone that couldn't drown out the sharper chill she felt from the eyes tracking her every step. She clutched a weathered leather satchel to her chest, its edges frayed from years of use, and took her seat at the plaintiff's table. Her breaths came shallow, her palms clammy against the bag's strap. Across the room, her ex-husband, Nathan Hargrove, lounged with the ease of a man who'd already won. His legs were crossed, one polished loafer dangling lazily, and he murmured something to the woman beside him, a sharp-featured brunette draped in gold jewelry, her lips curling into a smirk as she flicked a glance at Elise. His fiancée, Tara. The woman who'd replaced her, not just in Nathan's life but in the story he'd rewritten about their past. Elise avoided their gazes, her eyes fixed on the scratched surface of the table. This wasn't how she'd pictured her life unraveling. When they'd married 12 years ago, she'd believed in a future stitched together with love and mutual dreams. She'd been an aspiring architect then, sketching blueprints late into the night, her career a fragile but growing thing. But Nathan had a VY Siona logistics company he swore would change their lives, and she'd set her own ambitions aside to help him build it. She'd balanced the books, negotiated with suppliers, driven deliveries herself when drivers flaked. Hargrove Logistics had been their shared heartbeat, or so she'd thought. Now in this sterile courtroom, Nathan sat there claiming it was his alone, painting her as a leech who'd lounged at home while he'd toiled. Her name had been reduced to the plaintiff in the legal filings, a cold erasure of the woman she'd been. Elise Carver, once a name tied to Creati Vy tie and quiet strength, now felt like a ghost haunting the margins of someone else's triumph. The judge, a gray-haired man with a face carved from boredom, barely glanced up as the hearing began. Nathan's attorney, a slick man named Victor Grayson with a voice like oil, launched into his opening salvo. Your Honor, my client built Hargrove Logistics from the ground up, a self-made success story. The plaintiff contributed nothing tangible, nothing measurable. She seeks to profit from his hard work, plain and simple. Elise's stomach twisted. She wanted to scream, to hurl the truth at them like a grenade, but her voice stayed trapped, a soft tremble behind her lips. She tried to speak once, her words faltering as she mentioned the late nights she'd spent organizing invoices, the personal esvoyanges she'd poured into the company's first truck. I was there from the beginning, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The judge cut her off with a curt, please stay on topic, Carver. As if her life's work were an irrelevant footnote. Nathan leaned into the microphone, his tone dripping with condescension. Your Honor, I hate to be blunt, but my ex-wife's just chasing a payout for something she never helped create. A ripple of laughter came from Tara and a few of her friends in the back, their amusement a blade in Elise's chest. The hearing ended after 40 minutes, an eternity compressed into a public shaming. Elise left the courtroom alone, her low heels clicking against the marble floor, each step heavier than the last. Outside, Nathan lit a cigarette, the smoke curling around him as he chuckled with Grayson. Tara's voice carried deliberately loud. Pathetic. She thinks a sob story's going to rewrite history. Elise clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms. She didn't respond. She didn't cry. But the ache in her throat made it hard to swallow, hard to breathe. She'd never felt so diminished, so erased. That night, sleep eluded her. Nathan's smirk replayed in her mind, a loop of humiliation underscored by the courtroom's mocking echoes. She saw Grayson's polished lies, the way he'd turned their shared history into a fiction where she was the VY lane. She couldn't let it stand. At 2 a.m. she dragged herself to the garage, where boxes of their old life moldered in the shadows. Under the flicker of a bare bulb, she tore through them, folders stuffed with yellowed receipts, a spiral notebook of vendor contacts in her handwriting, a checkbook showing deposits from her SONs into their joint account when Nathan couldn't cover payroll. Evidence of her labor, her sacrifice. But would it matter? The court had already swallowed his version whole. The next morning, over coffee gone cold in her chipped mug, a name surfaced in her memory. Rachel Torres. Nathan's first business partner. A meticulous woman who'd left Hargrove Logistics before it hit big. Rachel had been a quiet force, always filing duplicates of everything: contracts, emails, receipts. Elise hadn't spoken to her in years, not since Rachel had walked away after a falling out with Nathan. On impulse, she dialed the number she still had saved. The line rang twice before Rachel's cautious voice answered. Elise? I didn't expect this. I need your help, Elise said, her words spilling out in a rush. She explained the divorce, the courtroom, Nathan's lies. Rachel was silent for a long moment before replying. I always figured he'd try to bury you too. Meet me tomorrow. I've got some things you might need. Driving to Rachel's apartment the next day felt like stepping into a time capsule. Memories flooded back, nights spent hunched over a folding table, sorting invoices by hand. Nathan sketching logos on napkins while she called vendors. The exhaustion of juggling housework and a fledgling business. Rachel greeted her with a weary smile and a hug that smelled faintly of lavender. Her apartment was cluttered but cozy, bookshelves sagging under the weight of binders and files. She pulled a box from beneath a desk, labeled Hargrove 20092013, in faded marker. Inside were treasures. Email printouts, payment logs, a draft agreement listing Elise as an operational co-founder, with a 35 Fantram state crossed out in Nathan's jagged scrawl when he'd redrafted it for investors. He made me shred the originals, Rachel said, but I kept copies. I knew how he operated. Elise's hand shook as she sifted through the pages. This wasn't just about money, it was about being seen. She'd poured her soul into Hargrove Logistics, and Nathan had scrubbed her from its story. Why'd you hold on to this? She asked. Rachel's eyes darkened. Because I saw him rewrite my part too. I left before he could erase me completely. I figured one day someone would need proof. They spent hours poring over the documents, Elise scanning each one onto a flash drive. Her heart pounded with something new, not rage, not despair, but determination. She wasn't done yet. Back home, she contacted a public attorney named Lena Brooks, a fierce advocate known for taking on messy divorce cases involving hidden assets. Lena's office was a cramped space downtown, walls lined with legal texts and framed articles about her wins. She listened as Elise laid out the story, her sharp eyes flicking between the documents and Elise's face. There's a case here, Lena said, tapping the draft agreement. This won't win on its own, but it cracks his narrative. You weren't just a wife, you were a partner. Let's make them see it. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. Lena dug into Nathan's financials, subpoenaed early tax filings, and tracked down former employees willing to talk. Elise unearthed more from her own record smells where Nathan thanked her for SOing the day with clients, a loan receipt from her SOs to buy their first delivery van. Lena hired a forensic accountant, suspecting Nathan had buried assets before the divorce. Men like him don't just lie, Lena said. They hide. Meanwhile, Elise's life outside the case grew quieter. Friends she'd once hosted for dinner now dodged her at the supermarket, whispering that she was a gold digger trying to ruin Nathan's success. The rumors stung, but she clung to Lena's advice. Let them talk. They're not the ones deciding this. At night, alone in her apartment, Elise felt the silence press in. No more business calls. No one needing her input. But in that stillness something stirred. A flicker of selfhood she hadn't noticed was missing. The second hearing arrived like a storm. Elise wore a charcoal blazer she'd borrowed from her sister, her hair pulled into a tight bun. Nathan strode in with Tara on his arm, her designer heels clicking like a metronome of confidence. But the room shifted when Lena began. She presented the draft agreement, the emails, the loan receipts. Mr. Hargrove claims sole ownership, Lena said, her voice steady. But these show a partnership, informal, yes, but real. Nathan's smirk faltered as Lena read an email aloud. Elise, you're the reason we're still afloat. I'd be lost without you. Dated 3 months before the company's official launch. The judge, less detached now, leaned forward. Nathan's attorney scrambled, dismissing the documents as sentimental nonsense. But the damage was done. During recess, Nathan cornered Elise in the hallway, his voice low and tight. Why are you doing this? You've humiliated me enough. She met his gaze, unflinching. You humiliated yourself, Nathan. I'm just showing what really happened. He stared at her, a stranger now, and she realized she didn't need his approval anymore. Lena's forensic accountant struck gold a week later. Nathan had funneled profits into a shell company owned by his brother-in-law 6 months before filing for divorce. The transfers labeled as consulting fees totaled overdue law $300,000. He was prepping to cut you out, Lena said, laying out the spreadsheets. This isn't just erasure. It's fraud. They filed a motion for a full audit, and to Elisa's shock, the judge approved it. The third hearing was a turning point. The audit revealed Nathan's shell game, and Lena introduced statements from 2 former drivers who remembered Elise negotiating their contracts. She was the one I dealt with, one wrote. Nathan just signed the checks. Grayson objected, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Nathan took the stand, his answers too vague. Why repay her loan with interest if she wasn't involved? Lena pressed. He mumbled about family support, but the courtroom wasn't buying it. Tara, perched in the gallery, shifted uncomfortably, her smirk gone. Afterward, Nathan's composure cracked. Elise overheard him snap at Grayson outside. You said she had nothing. You said this was airtight. His voice echoed, drawing stares. Tara was conspicuously absent, and whispers later confirmed she'd left him, unwilling to tether herself to a sinking ship. Elise felt no glee, only a quiet detachment. She didn't need Tara's exit to feel whole. The fourth hearing brought Rachel to the stand. Her testimony was a dagger. Elise ran operations while Nathan networked. Without her, we'd have folded in year 1. Grayson tried to paint Rachel as bitter, but she was unshakable. I kept records because I knew he'd do this someday, she said. The judge's pen scratched furiously. Elise sat taller, her presence no longer a shadow. Then came a bombshell. The auditor found a hidden ledger on Nathan's old laptop, seized under subpoena. It tracked Elise's loans and repayments, labeled as operational investments, proof he'd known her role all along. Lena presented it with calm precision. He documented her contributions, then hid them. The judge's voice was stern. Mr. Hargrove, explain why these appear in a business ledger if she was uninvolved. Nathan floundered, his excuses unraveling like cheap thread. Outside, the press swarmed. Nathan's empire teetered, clients pulled out, citing ethical concerns. A local paper ran a piece titled, The NVY Cybel Co-Founder, and Elise's phone buzzed with messages from strangers who'd read it. One from an old intern read, I saw you work those late nights. Thank you for fighting. It wasn't triumph she felt, but a ripple of connection. At the fifth hearing, Nathan's team offered a settlement. Dula $500,000 to drop the case. In a conference room thick with tension, he leaned forward, voice pleading. Let's end this, Elise. You've proved your point. She thought of every erased hour, every lie he'd sold. I'm not settling for hush money, she said. I want the truth on record. Lena grinned as they walked out. Nathan muttered, You'll regret this. But his threat felt hollow. The final hearing was electric. Lena laid out the full timeline, documents, testimonies, the ledger, each piece a brick in Elise's rebuilt story. Nathan fidgeted, his polish gone. Lena's closing was simple. This isn't revenge. It's recognition. The judge ruled. Elise was entitled to 40 Fantram of Hargrove Logistics early value, retroactive compensation, and full repayment of her investments, plus sanctions against Nathan for deliberate deception. The room buzzed. Nathan slumped, defeated. Elise didn't cheer. She sat still, letting the verdict sink in. Justice wasn't loud, it was steady, earned. Later, alone, she found a letter taped to her door from another ex-employee. I'm sorry I stayed quiet. You deserved better. She tucked it away with her Ivoidenke, a quiet closure. Months later, Lena called. A women's advocacy group wanted Elise to speak at their conference. She hesitated, public speaking wasn't her, but agreed. On stage, she said, I was erased with silence, but I learned silence protects no one. Speak your truth. It matters. The room listened, and she felt seen, not as a VY Tim, but as a voice. A year on, Elise opened Carver Consulting, a firm helping small businesses avoid the traps she'd fallen into. Her office was modest, but hers. As the sign went up, she smiled. Nathan's name no longer defined her, it was hers to reclaim. The city hummed outside, oblivious to her quiet VY Tory. She didn't need fanfare. She'd rewritten her story step by step, and that was enough.